This is a Fuente podcast.
I'm continuing. I've recorded like 3 now. It's like 12 a.m. I'm just, so ready to be done with this so I can spend time with my family. I think I'm just going to record these all night. So if I get kind of weird as time goes on, that's why. Okay, before in the last episode we established the doctrine of abrogation. We talked about how the stuff that happened later was the stuff that's binding. We also talked about how 2 episodes ago how he had the Median phase and then he had like the Meccan phase or the Maghazi phase where he was raiding. Okay, we're going to continue on with that story and go on to his death and look at a little bit after his life to kind of like address that issue in the ABC video where it talked about how they had centuries of peace and coexistence and everyone loved each other after the start of Islam. We're going to see if that lives up to historical scrutiny in this episode. With all these rules ordering the slaughter of polytheists who were bringing money into the city of Mecca, some Muslims were worried. So remember the raid started and they were killing all these polytheists. Some Muslims were worried about how this would affect them economically. After all, if you kill all of the trade, all the people who are importing, exporting goods, it's going to hurt you economically. Allah's word came through the seal of the prophets Muhammad, bringing them comforting news. Quote, "O you who believe, surely the polytheists are impure, so do not allow them to approach the sacred mosque after this time. If you fear poverty, Allah will provide for you from His grace if He wills. Fight those who do not believe in God or the last day, nor forbid what God and His messenger have forbidden." So not only do you have to believe like them, you have to forbid the things that they forbid. Okay? You have to, support their beliefs even if you're not a Muslim. "Nor abide by the religion of truth from among them who received the scripture until they pay the jizya and feel their subjugation." So kill them and take their stuff, or let them pay you a ransom to stay alive. This jizya, as I've mentioned before, is a ransom tax. In other words, if you're doing bad financially, just take the money from non-believers, Jews and Christians. Now, is it because of an action that these Jews and Christians did historically within that context? Well, we learn in verse 30 to 31. This is the reasoning for doing this. Quote, "The Jews said Ezra is the Son of God, and the Christians said the Messiah is the Son of God. These are their statements out of their mouths. They emulate the statements of those who blasphemed before. May God assail them. How deceived they are. They have taken their rabbis and their priests as lords instead of God, as well as the Messiah, Son of Mary. Although they were commanded to worship none but the one God, there is no God except He. Glory to Him high above what they associate with Him." That's from chapter 9, verse 30 to 31. First, I want to point out there's no historical evidence whatsoever that Jews have ever called Ezra the Son of God. That is just completely not based in reality. If Allah knows something that everyone here on earth doesn't know, then maybe He's telling the truth. Our other option is that Muhammad was confused and was making crap up as he went along. But back to the quote. "This means that in the eyes of the Quran, the Jews and Christians are like polytheists." What does this mean? Muslims ought to conquer them. Quote from Surah 9:33. "He, Allah, is the one who sent the messenger Muhammad with guidance," the Quran, "and true religion, Islam, in order to prevail over every faith." Chapter 9 is a big deal of the Quran. Okay. In Qureshi's book, Answering Jihad, Qureshi states, "Note these last words. Islam is now to be dominant over every other faith. For this reason, Jews and Christians will be subjugated and made to pay tribute." Verse 34 to 35 clarified these proclamations are still ultimately related to the financial concerns of Muslims because they point out that the Jewish and Christian leaders have great wealth. These verses also taunt Christians saying their good news, that's what gospel means, is actually they are going to hell. Chapter 9 of the Quran, that's the end of his quote. Chapter 9 of the Quran is the last part of the Quran chronologically. It abrogates all before it. It is the marching orders. It doesn't matter if Muhammad said there's no compulsion in religion in his Median phase. Okay, we're in the Maghazi phase. From then on, the last given command abrogates the others. It orders slaughter of polytheists and the subjugation and forced tax on all Christians and Jews for being polytheists. What is someone supposed to do if they're Muslim and feel uncomfortable supporting all of this violence? If you're a Muslim and you feel uncomfortable supporting this violence, Allah has a verse for you. Oh, you who believe, what is wrong with you? Have you become happy with the worldly life instead of the afterlife? If you do not march forth, he will punish you with a great punishment. That's Surah 9, 38 to 39. Muslims, you are commanded to fight jihad. This is not a quote. They're commanded to fight jihad. But this is a quote. Quote, march, whether heavy or light, and carry out jihad with your wealth and your lives in the way of Allah. That is good for you if you only knew. That's from chapter 9, verse 41. Muhammad is told, quote, this is from chapter 9, verse 44, those who believe in Allah and in the last day do not ask you to excuse them from jihad. Okay, so he's saying if you're a real believer, you're not going to ask to be excused from it. Verse 49 says, people who don't want to do jihad will go to hell. So all these Muslims who are not off doing jihad are going to go to hell. Sorry, Ilhan Omar. That's tough titties for you. Muslims will quickly come up with excuses to dismiss all this. In his book, Nabil states the following, quote, when I first discovered these facts, my response was to try to find a way to say they were, despite appearances, defensive battles. The raids I dismissed as historically uncertain. The Battle of Badr, an attempt to reclaim what Meccans had stolen. The Battle of Tabuk, a preemptive strike under threat of Roman attack. But these were my knee-jerk responses to defend the teachings I had inherited, and they were implausible at best. When considering the big picture, such explanations are wholly indefensible. End quote. The later views of Muhammad's first followers are a window into what he was saying as well. We clear our lens by using primary sources from victims of the Muslim conquest as well as from the Hadith. We have both. Sunni Muslims, so that's 80% of all Muslims, consider Sahih Bukhari the most reliable of all Hadith, as I've mentioned several times. In this Hadith, Muhammad has an entire book in one of the volumes on how to conduct jihad. In it we find the following quotes. Quote, I have been ordered to fight against the people until they testify that none has the right to be worshipped but Allah, and that Muhammad is Allah's messenger. Only then will they save their lives and property from me. Sahih Bukhari, that's volume 1, book 2, number 25. And now I'm quoting from Sahih Muslim, the next most reliable hadith. It also has a book on jihad where we read the following, quote, I will expel the Jews and Christians from the Arabian Peninsula and will not leave any but Muslims. Muhammad said he would do this, and the historical record seems to indicate that this is exactly what happened. Sahih al-Bukhari 4:52-44 states, a man came to Allah's messenger and said, instruct me as to such a deed as equals jihad and reward. He replied, I do not find such a deed. Then he added, can you, while the Muslim fighter is in the battlefield, enter your mosque to perform prayers without cease and fast and never break your fast? The man said, but who can do that? Abu Hurairah added, the muhadin, the Muslim fighter, is rewarded even for the footsteps of his horse while it wanders about tied in a long rope. This is a quote from Muhammad that's basically saying, yeah, it's better to do jihad than pray. And religious violence is superior to prayer and fasting. Again in Al-Bukhari, volume 4, book 52, verse 46, we read, I heard Allah's messenger saying, the example of a mujahideen in Allah's cause is like a person who fasts and prays continuously. Allah guarantees he will admit the mujahideen in his cause into paradise if he is killed. Otherwise, he will return to his home safely with rewards and war booty. So if he's killed in battle, he goes straight to heaven. There's hundreds of more hadith like this. But if hearing what ancient Muslims themselves believe doesn't convince you about what ancient Muslims believed, we also have the voice of some of their victims. The Chronicles of John Bishop of Niku tell us the story of Christians living in northern Egypt in 640 AD. Amr ibn al-As was a companion of Muhammad who came to a city with no defense because the soldiers had deserted. And this is what John records for us. Amr and the Muslim army made their entry into Nakius and took possession. Finding no soldiers, they proceeded to put to the sword all whom they found in the streets and in the churches, men, women, and infants. They showed mercy to none. After they had captured the city, they marched against other localities and sacked them. They put all they found to the sword. Let us now cease, for it is impossible to recount the iniquities perpetrated by the Muslims after their capture of the island of Nakius. This is in northern Africa. And this isn't retaliation for colonization. Okay, colonization is 1,000 years away from this time. And this isn't retaliation for the Crusades. Those are 400 years away. But this is 10 years after the life of Muhammad. So it's very likely a window into whatever his marching orders were. And not only had the Muslims fought everyone around them, they also fought and continued to fight, never ceasing civil wars against each other. In 150 years after the start of Islam, they'd expanded the empire from India all across Africa and the Middle East to the Atlantic Ocean. By the time of the Crusades, listen to this, by the time of the Crusades, they had wiped out 2/3 of the Christian world, and they had destroyed the Persian Empire, the Achaemenid Empire. The Crusades, though, they're a black spot on Christian history. And you can hardly see any debate of Christian ethics online without it popping up and being rubbed in the Christian's face. If you ever quote a violent verse from the Quran, you're immediately greeted with reminders of the Crusades. But is this actually logical? Is this historical? Or is this part of this Western bias to always bash ourselves and bash our history? Can there be a view that isn't a hatred of Muslims, but also takes facts and logic seriously? Okay, here's some facts. Christianity was peaceful for centuries after its inception. All the primary and earliest sources of Christianity advocate peace to absurd extremes. Absurd, like turning the other cheek. It wasn't even until Augustine, he's centuries after the life of Jesus, that Christianity was mixed with Roman culture, that he came up with the idea of a just war. And even with this just war, you could only do it in certain circumstances, and then you had to repent afterward. It was like a necessary evil. Muslims apologists have even taken advantage of this turn the other cheek mentality to slap Christians during debates, knowing there'd be no recourse for what happened. After Augustine's just war, it took 7 centuries before Christianity had a concept of a holy war. 700 years. And when this happened, it was in violation of the objective moral principles that were outlined in the origin of the religion. It wasn't following them, it was in contradiction to them. This is the biggest difference. This is a huge difference. What matters is those primary source documents giving you the objective moral standards that are laid out in the religion. During the Crusades, the Christians did horrible atrocities like slaughtering Jews in Europe and butchering everyone in Jerusalem. But at the same time, we have to acknowledge historically this was, in every way you can conceive it, a defensive war. They only were attacking after Byzantium was begging for help for centuries, and the West had been ignoring Byzantium because they hated the Eastern Orthodox Christians. Well, I don't know if they were Eastern Orthodox at the time, but they didn't really care for the Eastern Roman Empire, the Westerners. The Crusades were in every way, this is a quote from Crusade scholar Thomas Baden in an article for the National Review. The Crusades were in every way a defensive war. They were the West's belated response to the Muslim conquest of 2/3 of the Christian world. And it, like, Muslims had even, I think in the Third Caliphate, they'd even conquered all the way up into Spain. Okay? So into Western Europe. From the beginning, Muhammad taught salvation through battle. The first army amongst my followers who will invade Caesar's city will be forgiven of their sins. That's from Sahih Bukhari, Volume 4, Book 56, number 2924. God has purchased from the faithful their lives and worldly goods, and in return has promised them the garden. They will fight for the cause of God. They will slay and be slain. That's from Surah 9, verse 111. Qureshi has an MA in religion from Duke University, states, quote, "Jihad was commanded by Muhammad and the Quran, both in principle and reality, whereas Jesus commanded no such thing as the Crusades, neither in principle nor in reality. Therefore, jihad reflects the religion of Islam, whereas the Crusades do not reflect Christian faith. There's significant difference between the two." The following is a letter from the Muslim Sultan Baybars to the Christian ruler of Antioch before the Crusades ever even started. This is the letter he wrote to the Christian leader of Antioch. Quote, "Death came among the besieged from all sides and by all roads. We killed all whom you appointed to guard the city or defend its entrances. You had seen your knights trampled under the feet of horses, your provinces given up to pillage, your riches distributed by full measure, the wives of your subjects placed on the market for sale. If you had seen the altars and crosses overturned, the leaves of the gospel torn and cast to the winds." Can you imagine if we did that to Qurans, what would happen? "And the sepulchres of your ancestors profaned. If you had seen your enemies, the Muslims, trampling upon the tabernacle, burning alive monks, priests, and deacons in the sanctuary. In short, if you had seen your palaces given up to the flames, the dead devoured by the fire of this world, the church of St. Paul and that of St. Peter completely and entirely destroyed, certainly you would have cried out, 'By heaven, I wish I had become dust.'" End quote. The Baybars destroyed Antioch. They killed 14,000 Christians and sold 100,000 into slavery. Was this in response to the First Crusade? No. They've been ordered to conquer the world, and they were fulfilling the will of Allah 400 years later. In the 700 years after the start of Islam, Muslims conquered two-thirds of the Christian world. The Emperor of Byzantium had been requesting aid from the West for centuries. It was not until Muslims sacked Nicaea that the Pope Urban II finally acquiesced to the Byzantine request and issued the order for the First Crusade. So hopefully that was illuminating on some of the history of this. And it's not just like the Christians were the good guys and the Muslims were the bad guys. They're both the bad guys. And speaking to that myth of there was just peace in the Middle East, it wasn't peace at all. The Turks were fighting the Fatimids from Egypt in Jerusalem before the Crusaders even got there, and they beat the hell out of each other so badly. That's how this inferior Crusader army was able to take over the Holy Land. It's because the Muslims that were there were continuously fighting each other for it. And the Christians were fighting each other too. With I think in the Third Crusade, the Christians laid siege to Constantinople in the Byzantine Empire. Okay, so humanity's a hot mess, and we need a savior. And we need to be looking at objective moral principles laid out by the founders of these religions rather than what the confused and greedy adherents are doing. All right, that's all for this episode. I'll see you guys next time.